Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean, and I'm delighted you're joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I'm joined by Charles Sexton, MVP, who will cover rapid development with YAML and components in Power Apps. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar. Our handle is @ESPC_community and our hashtag is #ESPC25. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, Error Mixology, Crafting Resilient Cloud Flows with Power Automate with Agnes MVP. This webinar will take place Thursday, 30th of January, 11 a.m. 12 p.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Elevate your Microsoft Power Platform skills at the European Power Platform Conference in Vienna on 16-19 June 2025. Power Platform Week attendees get €150 off tickets with code Power Platform Week, valid until February 7th. Learn the latest in Power Apps, Power Automate, and Dynamics 365 while connecting with experts and peers. Scan the QR code to register now or visit www.sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference. Don't miss our 2-for-1 sale for FalCon Europe, available February 5th only. Register now to get 2 participants for the price of 1. More perspectives, more networking, and more opportunities. Act fast. This offer is for 1 day only at www.sharepointeurope.com/FalCon Europe 2-for-1 deal. Ready to sharpen your skills or make the career-defining move? Join us at ESPC 25 to learn from 100+ experts across 120+ sessions, covering everything you need to stay ahead in Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, and Copilot. Get your tickets at www.sharepointeurope.com/pricing. After this webinar, we'll have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you might have into the questions box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass it over to today's webinar presenter, Charles. Hello, Charles. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Sean. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. And yeah, thanks for letting me be here. This is amazing because I've been following the Learn content on ESPC for a long time now. There's so much good content on there. And I've really been enjoying the Power Platform Week as well. I've watched quite a few sessions and I'm looking forward to Agnes's tomorrow. So yeah, it's been great. So today, my session is going to be talking about rapid development with YAML and components in Power Apps. So what does that really mean? Basically means that in Power Apps, we have 2 different types of apps. We've got model-driven apps where the interface is generated. We've got canvas apps where we're given a blank canvas. And where we're given a blank canvas, it can be quite time-consuming in order to build out your apps. And so I've been always looking at ways that we can improve the speed of our development, the efficiency of our development, and to create more professional applications. And that's where YAML and components come into it. So I'm very excited to talk about that today. So the agenda for today is firstly an introduction, just so that you know who's talking to you. Secondly, we're going to look at the Plan Designer, which is a new AI feature from Microsoft to help us in building solutions. And it's quite interesting, and we'll look at the positives and the negatives of that. Then we'll delve into components. So what are they? How do they work? How can you build them? And we'll have a look at a demo of some components as well. Then we're going to look at the impact of Copilot. Now, there's a specific reason why this is slotting into it. I don't want to bombard you with more AI. I'm sure you're getting that already in your daily lives. But there's just a short bit that we need to touch on with Copilot that's very interesting, and it leads us on to the next topic, which is YAML. And we'll look at YAML, what it is. It's a strange acronym or strange abbreviation, And we'll see why, and we'll have a look at a demo of why YAML is actually quite useful for us. And then by the end of it, hopefully you have a new title, which is Speedy Dev for Life. So hopefully by the end of it, you'll be a much quicker developer and have some new tools to add to your tool shed toolkit. So who am I? My name's Charles Sexton, or Charlie Sexton. I'm a Power Platform Solution Architect at Capgemini. I've been there since November. Absolutely loving it. There are some incredible minds in the company. It's a great place to be. I'm very passionate about Power Apps, as you can probably tell from the fact that I'm talking about it. I used to be a web developer in my previous life, my career before Power Platform, and I've brought knowledge from web development into Power Apps, and that's part of the reason for this talk today. I'm also a co-owner of the Power Platform UX UI accessibility group, where we touch on user interface design, user experience, and accessibility issues across Power Platform. We have monthly calls on the 11th of every month. So yeah, just do a web search if you want to know more about that. And then those are my certifications in the bottom left because I really enjoy going for them. Quite proud of the fact that I've got those. So I also have a blog if you're interested in learning more about Power Apps generally, sometimes other elements of Power Platform, which is charlessexton.com. And I'm an MVP. So through my blogging, uploading a couple of videos, doing talks like this, and user group things, I've managed to become a Microsoft MVP as an award for all of those commitments, those contributions. So without further ado, let's get into the real nitty-gritty of it, which is the first thing, the plan designer. Now, you might have heard of it, you might not, it doesn't matter either way. The plan designer is basically where you describe your problem, your business problem in natural language, and Power Platform will try to go off and create a solution for it as far as software is concerned. So what I decided to do was be really lazy and just tell Copilot that I want to have a business problem written out for me. So it did that, and it created this equipment tracker business problem. So essentially the gist of it is that we have employees who rent equipment from the business, or rather they take equipment from the business, and we need to log it. We need to track what equipment has been taken, when it's been brought back. It's something along those lines. Not really too important, but that's the general gist of it. So we told that to the plan designer, and then the plan designer has gone off and decided that we need 2 user roles for this particular solution. So we have our employee, which is the person who takes the equipment, and we have an admin who will be managing details like adding and removing equipment and things like that. So I thought, yeah, okay, that's fine, that makes sense. We just want something simple. We'll just accept that. So then what it does is it goes and generates a schema of the database for us. So when I was looking at this, what I noticed is that it sort of makes sense, but also sort of doesn't make sense. So if you're well versed with Power Platform and you understand Dataverse, you understand how it all works, that's absolutely fine. And if you don't understand it, that's also absolutely fine. I'll explain it to you. So basically we have 5 tables here. So we've got an equipment table, which is storing all of the equipment. We've got an employee table in the bottom left. So that's all of the employees. And then those have a relationship with the equipment usage. So each employee would use the equipment. So it's that kind of general idea. So that all makes sense to me. But we're given a user access level table, which doesn't really make sense to me because we have security roles in Power Platform, and those should be managing that. Same with the admin table. And for the eagle-eyed, the people who know about the common data model, we're using a table, or rather creating a table called employee, but we already have users in our system in a users table. So we don't really need to create an employee table. So my thoughts from that were this, that we're guessing 3 tables we don't really need, and this is not really the best way of going about things. Now, I'm sure that Microsoft are going to develop the plan designer further and give us the ability to use tables from the common data model. That would replace the employee bit. And with admin and user access level, we could actually just talk to the plan designer in natural language and say, can you just remove these tables? And it will do it for us. So it's very clever, but this is showing that there are some limitations with the way that it does things. So anyway, we move on because we'll just accept that for now. And then it looks at the user experiences. So what are the components of our solution that it wants to create? So it wants to create an app for the employees, which would be a Canvas app, which is what we're focusing on for today. It wants to create a model-driven app for managing all of the equipment. So that would be for the admin. And then it wants to create a Power Automate flow, which is called security and maintenance. But it doesn't give me any details about that. So I'm not really sure what that one is about. So what we're looking at is here, we've got our data with our tables, we've got our user experiences, and I'll just accept it for now because I'm experimenting and I want to see what it looks like. When I go and look at that flow that it was talking about, it tells me that recommended flows cannot be created yet. So whatever that was, we don't know at the moment, but at some point in the future, we'll be able to automatically generate Power Automate flows through this experience, which is really nice. But the thing to bear in mind is that if you do need to create a Power Automate flow, you can just go to Power Automate and speak to it in natural language and get it whatever you want generated for you there. And that's a different experience. So back to the Canvas app, because this is really what we're about here. This is what we get when we open this up. So we have 4 screens there. We can see that initially it's a welcome screen that we see. We can see that there's this thing about this data source being added to the app. Someone who's new to Power Apps, they might find that quite confusing. Like, why is it telling me that? Well, all it's saying is just that it's added one of the Dataverse tables. You don't really need to know that, so you can ignore that. So looking at what we've got in front of us here with this welcome screen, what is it and what does it do? This is not really what I was expecting to create for my equipment tracking app. The other thing as well is that it's calling it equipments, which I don't really like. So here's the screen. So then I wiggle my mouse over the equipments bit because I'm thinking, okay, we've got 3 cards here. You can click on a card and go into the details, right? But my pointer doesn't change into the hand. So I'm thinking, well, is it clickable? I click on it. No, it's not clickable. So I had to go back into editing the app to figure out what's going on here. And as it turns out, those stock images are clickable and the titles are clickable, but nothing else. So I don't really feel like that's a very good user experience. So I thought, okay, let's just ignore that for now. We can fix that. Let's go into something. So we go into the equipment and I want to create a new one. So I'm clicking on new, but again, nothing happens. And it's not because it's slow or it's delayed or anything. That new text does nothing. What you actually have to click on is the plus icon. So again, I'm thinking, this is really not the user experience that I want. And if I'm going to have to change this into something I want, it's going to take me a very long time. So looking at the speed of my development, because we're talking about rapid development here, this will actually most likely reduce my speed. Something I noticed as well. So I'm in the studio, the Power App Studio, and I always notice this icon when it has that red dot. When we have the stethoscope, which is our app checker, the red dot means that there are issues with the app. And I'm thinking, well, I've just generated this app. How can it possibly have issues already? So we click on that and it opens up our app checker in the right-hand panel. And we can see that we've got accessibility issues, performance issues, and offline issues. Are they really issues? Well, we have to go into each one. So for accessibility, we're missing accessible labels on 55 of the controls. So that's 55 controls where I need to add in those accessible labels. Otherwise, I've got a severe accessibility issue because it means that a screen reader won't be able to read out what those controls are. The missing tab stops means that people who are using keyboards either for speed or because they have to use a keyboard, they can't use a mouse, they're going to be stumped as well. So we have severe accessibility issues in the app that I'm going to need to fix. Looking at the performance, it's not a big deal, but for some reason there are some unused variables. Now, why are there unused variables being created? I don't know. And then looking at the offline capability, well, I didn't actually mention anything about offline capability, and I don't really care about offline capability for this app. But I've got some errors in there because tables aren't configured for it. So that's something else I need to deal with. So I feel like this was supposed to create lots for me and reduce my effort and improve my efficiency, but it's created a lot of things for me to do. So, okay, I give up with the plan designer because I realize that as a professional app developer, this is not going to give me what I want. So I need something else. So what do we have? What are the tools that we can use? We can use components. Now, this is a description from Copilot as to what a component is within the context of software. So it's a reusable piece of code or a module. So in our case, it's a module that can be integrated into a larger software system, which in our case is an app. And it encapsulates certain functionality and can be independently developed and maintained. And that's really important. So when we look at why we would use components, well, you've got reusability. So you build a component, which is like a mini app, and you can use it across your entire app. You can even potentially use it across multiple apps. And we'll come into that in the future. Maintenance. So you're reusing this component all over the place, but you need to make a change. You only have to change your component, and that change will proliferate across all of the places that you're using the component. Imagine that you're copying and pasting your Canvas app screens, and then you need to change something on one of the screens, but you've used it on all of the other screens. You'd then have to change it everywhere. Using components means that you don't have to do that. Another aspect is performance. So all of your components, so your component will have controls inside it, and all of those controls inside your component can be analyzed in isolation. So the performance is better because it can be analyzed as a single control. And consistency. So you're using the same user interface, user experience, same accessibility that took you ages to set up potentially, the same wording. So many things are the same because you're using the same component over and over. So you're getting that consistency. And consistency also helps with professionalism. So we've talked about components, but there are actually different types of components, and it's important to know that. So the component that we've mostly been referring to is thought of as a Canvas component, which is where you have your app and then you have components inside of your app that you've built inside of that app. So they live in the app, they're not used outside of it, but they can also use the app scope. Now, using the app scope means that you can then access all of your variables in your app inside of that component. But there are performance implications to that, because then the component needs to understand all of the stuff that's happening in your app. So really, you don't want to do that. Ideally, you keep app scope turned off, and if you want information to be available inside that component, you would pass it in through properties or parameters. There are also library components. Library components are just like Canvas components, except they live in their own solution. So they're outside of your app, and they can be reused across multiple apps in the same environment. So you imagine that for your Canvas component, you have your Canvas app and the components are inside it. For your library component, you have a solution and your components are inside of that solution. And you can then pass them to different environments and they can be used across multiple environments. And then the final one, which we're not going to talk about at all today, are PCF components. And these are thought of as pro code. So these are basically where you're writing JavaScript or TypeScript code and you're going outside of the boundaries of low code. They live outside of the app like a library component and also can be reused in multiple apps, but you wouldn't be building those in the Power Apps interface, you'd be building those in your code editor. So it's a very different experience, and it's not useful for speedier development generally. So we're just looking at the Canvas components for these. So this is what a component looks like. So you can see up there in the top left, you've got components. And what I've highlighted there, the CMP standing for component, steps vertical is the name. That's the component itself in the tree view. So then you're building it almost like a mini app, as you can see. It's a very familiar interface if you've built a Canvas app before. And you can just add your gallery, add your text labels, and so on and so forth. You can pass data in, you can send data outside of the component. And then whenever you call that component, it will look the same as this, and you can pass in whatever data you need. So speaking of passing in data and things like that, by default, you have an input property and an output property. So you can send data in, or you can send data out or retrieve data. And on the bottom right-hand side, you can see all of the different data types that are available for those properties. That's all well and good, but that doesn't offer that much functionality. What happens if you need some kind of behavioral change? Well, you can't really do that with this. You can't easily trigger events and actions and functions from your components or from your app to your component. And that can be an issue, that can be a limitation, and that might mean that you would then need to leverage Procode, except for the fact that Microsoft have thought about that and they've implemented enhanced component properties. These were recently in experimental, recently moved to preview. They seem pretty stable to me. I've used them quite extensively and not had issues with them. And I believe they will be generally available at some point in the near future, but it's not yet been announced. And enhanced component properties mean that you suddenly get access to lots of different ways you can manage your components. So you've got your data, which is your input and your output that we had previously, but now you can treat components like functions where you can pass in parameters. You can trigger events. So this would be an event that happens inside your component and it sends that to the app to say, this thing has happened, do something about it. Or you can have an action where your app tells your component, I want this to happen. So it's very useful. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to go into looking at components. And I have my component library here. Can I just check, Sean, has that changed for you?
I can still see the Power Apps UI Canvas components. That's what I can see.
Okay.
The add contacts. Yeah.
So you can see Power Apps UI Canvas components with the...
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is my component library. So this is outside of a Canvas app. And I've built several components for this. And I can show you what the components look like. So we've got our controls inside the component. What I've built here is basically a stepper. So where you would have your form experience, you might have multiple steps for your form. And this would help you to understand where you are within that experience, so you know how much more is to come. And what we're doing here is we're passing through some information and we've got some things that happen within this component. It's quite a complicated one. So in the bottom right-hand corner here, I've got my steps. And if I open that up, you can see that it's a table of information, table of data. So I can pass through this table of data that I've created. So I've decided I want every step to have an ID, title, description, status, and whether it's the current step or not. And I can pass that through to this component and then use that information. So what that means is from my app, I can then pass through whatever steps I want to pass through to it, and it will automatically update. So that's just the simple data entry into a component. And then we have another one, which is a vertical breakpoint. So this is a feature where when it goes below 800 pixels wide, it will switch to a vertical layout instead of a horizontal layout. So this is responsive design. This is something that's really important to learn about. We're passing in an accessible label at the moment of steps, but of course that in your app would then describe what this is. So what is this? What are these form steps? So this is what the screen reader would read out to the user. And we have something here that's an on select. And what the on select is, okay, this happened last time. It crashed when I tried to open it and it's happened again. So I'm going to reload. But basically what the on select is that I'm sending a function outside of this component so that you can then trigger something to happen when something's selected. Yeah, so if you just bear with me for a moment on this one and then I'll show how it works. So there seems to be a bug at the moment with this particular one, and I'm not sure why it happens. But
webinar curse.
yeah, this happened earlier in my dry runs, and I'm not sure why. It must be a Microsoft bug that I need to log with them. But it should open quickly enough, and we can get back to it.
Perfect.
So the way that I got into it before was just by clicking on there, and then it would let me, which it does. So it's a very strange bug. So yeah, for my component, I've created an event, and this is an on-select event. So what this means is that when this component is used in the app, you can trigger this event, this on-select. So if I click on one of my items, you can see that I'm triggering the on-select. So whenever someone clicks on this item in the app, the on-select is triggered. So it works just like the other controls, like a button has an on-select, So it works just like a button. So I've created my own kind of artificial button. And there are other properties that I've got here, like selected. So this is an output property. This is data output. So whenever a record here is selected, I set it to whatever the item is from the gallery. So it means that inside of the app, you can get all of the data for that selected item. And then finally, I've got a recommended height. This is quite a nifty one. This again is just an output property. This time it's a number. But what this is looking at is what's that vertical breakpoint? So what width are we going to change this from horizontal to vertical? And then let's tell the app what height we want our component to be. So this then gives you that flexibility in having specific heights and widths for your components that you're telling the app about. And we're not needing to turn on app scope. And of course, because this is a component library, there is no such thing as app scope. So it's very important to be able to use things like this, to use ideas and concepts like this. I've created several different components here. Like I have a dialog here with, again, more options to it. You can pass through things like your header text, your dialog text, your button text, what color the button might be, lots of different options. You can create headers. So you can build lots of different components. And once you've got all of these components, building an app after that is so much faster. So the speed boost there is you build something once, you build your component once, and you use it again and again and again. However, there is a caveat, unfortunately, like there was with the plan designer. The caveat here isn't quite as large, fortunately, and it's that there are limitations with components. And the biggest limitations are here. You can't insert a component into a gallery or a form. Now you're creating a Canvas app because you most likely want to have data inputted into it. It's in almost every app, so you'll most likely have a form, unless you're doing some custom form stuff outside of that. But it's worthwhile using a form because it has so many additional features that you can use. So it means you can't use components. And quite often you'll be using galleries as well, because you might have data that you need to display, a list of data, and you might not want to use the modern controls table because that's in preview at the moment, and there could be issues with it. So that's a lot of development stuff, gallery and form. And if you think about it, you can't really create a component that does your layout because Canvas apps just don't work that way. So how are you going to do your layouts? Do you have to copy and paste or recreate your layouts? There are some issues there, and we'll come back to that because what we're going to go into now is just a really small detour about the history of how we're getting to the YAML stage. And that's because of Copilot. And I imagine Microsoft having this kind of thought process about Copilot with Power Apps. So they were probably thinking, we've got Copilot, this is amazing technology, we're trying to figure out how to best utilize it. We want Copilot to build apps, because surely that's the best way to get a speed boost from things. In order to do that, we need to generate controls. But there's a problem. We can't generate controls because the code is compiled. So we need to destructure it. So I believe that's what Microsoft's thought process was prior to YAML. And that's what brought us to the point of having YAML. And so because of this, they removed the compilation step for Canvas apps. So we can look at the source code to Canvas apps now, which is amazing because it offers so much potential. And because of that, as soon as Microsoft managed to remove that compilation step, suddenly they were releasing a host of features. Suddenly we could manage the source code for our Canvas apps. We could connect our environments to source control. We could work together in real time in Canvas apps. So this is like when you have, in the past, you'd have Excel open and you'd be working together in real time in your Excel spreadsheet. Well, now you can do the same thing in a Canvas app. That's like magic to me. We can understand Canvas app functionality through code view. And this is where YAML comes into it, because YAML is the code that's telling the app what to generate. And we're now able to understand the functionality through that code view. We can view that code. So YAML, what is YAML? Well, it stands for YAML ain't markup language. Doesn't really mean much to me, probably doesn't mean much to you. what actually is it? So it's a data-orientated language. It's just essentially a way of structuring data. It's often used with config files. So if you have heard of application lifecycle management, so that's where you would work on your application in a development environment. And then when you've finished working on it and you want to move it across to be tested, and you want to move your solution over to a test environment, quite often you'd use a pipeline for that. And if you're creating a pro code pipeline, you'd be configuring it with YAML. So that's where YAML comes into play. It's a configuration language. And this is what it looks like. So this is a Canvas app control. It's a text input. So you can see where it says control text input. We've got a couple of properties for it. So the X and Y values. So basically saying this is where this text input should be on our screen. And right at the top on line 1, it says text input canvas 1, and that's the name of your control. So if we can access this and we can modify this, and then we can paste it back into our app, you can start to see why I had this light bulb moment as soon as they talked about being able to access YAML. So what does it look like when it gets a bit more complicated? Let's say we add a font color to our text input, and then we look at the code. It's as simple as that. It's just a bit of PowerFX there. So equals, and then whatever code we want. And then if we're doing multi-line PowerFX, it looks like this. So we've put a value in there, which is some PowerFX code to say that if the user's full name is my name, then it's me. Otherwise, it's not me. And the way that they do that is they have this, so they have the value colon, and then they have a pipe symbol, and then a dash. And then everything after that can be multi-line PowerFX. And indentation is very important for YAML, as you can see the indentation there. So let's look at what YAML actually is and does, because that's the most important thing. So as a very quick and simple example, I suppose what we can do is we can right click on anything in here, and you've got code view preview there. So it is in preview, but you don't have to worry about it being a preview feature because you're just looking at some text. And so you can see the code behind everything. We can see that that's the title of the control, it's a text control, and then what different properties it has. So it's very interesting. So then from seeing all of this side of things, I thought to myself, well, I can potentially increase my development speed if I can generate this code. So I decided to create a YAML generator. And I've just put this random logo in there. It really doesn't matter. But I created this app in order to generate myself some YAML code, because I thought, well, how far can I take this? So I created a screen template, and then I copied the code for it. And I put that code inside of this text input. And then I went through the text input, finding the places where I would potentially want a variable. I would want something to change. So if we look at this, we've got our screen control, or rather this is a container. You can see group container. This is our group container. We're calling it con screen. So it's a container for the screen and then an underscore, and then we want a suffix for it. Now, the reason why I give all of my controls suffixes, and you can see it on the left-hand side here, is so that I don't get any conflicts across screens. If I called this just con sidebar, so container sidebar, and then I used con sidebar in another screen, I would have a naming conflict because you can only have unique names. So that's why I have this underscore STS, which stands for screen template screen. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm needing to rename all of these controls. So you can imagine that with all of this, if you look at the number of variables, if I was copying and pasting this screen and I wasn't looking at the YAML side of things, I would have so many things that I need to rename in order for this to become usable, because there are so many variables throughout. So that's an issue. And that's where I wanted to create this speed boost, because I wanted to change those variables on the fly and change them all in one go. So let's say that our page header is, I think, contact or contacts, let's go for. And then the control suffix, well, it can be anything. I tend to use 3 letters. So I type these in. Now the eagle-eyed of you will have noticed that it's changing things on the right-hand side. So if I put in a bunch of 1s, then you can see that these are changing. So it's dynamic. So it's creating this YAML code for me that's dynamically changing and giving me what I want. So rather than renaming everything, I just type in two things, click on copy YAML code, and what that will do is it will copy everything from inside this input. So now I have my YAML code. I can go into my app, and I've just created a blank app here. I can do paste code, and then there we go. I have my screen. So I have my screen with all of the controls named accordingly. So I don't have to rename numerous controls because it could be many more than this. It's already put in my page title of contacts because that was one of my variables. And as you can imagine, I could have more variables. I could go even more complex with this. And I think something that is yet to be explored that could be very interesting is imagine if you had a chatbot or some kind of AI generation service where you could tell it, this is what I want, and then it would create the YAML code for you. Or going even beyond that, we're essentially creating our own plan designer here, right? This is basically how the plan designer works. AI is generating this code, and then it's creating the app for you. It's just a way of automating it. So it gets incredibly clever. So this is just a very simple example as to creating a screen. If I click on play, you can see that it's all functional, and I think it's somewhat responsive as well. Like we've got the menu hiding. We haven't got a replacement menu appearing, but yeah, there's some cool things to it. So if you put in a lot of effort to build your screen layouts, then the last thing you want to do is to have to copy and paste and then change like 20, 30, 40 different controls so that they're renamed properly. What you could do instead, just create yourself just a simple generator, and then you've got a speed boost there. So that's with the screen layout. I've also got an example with a form text input. Because I want to use the form control, but I find it cumbersome to use the form control. And so let's use the contacts here, and I'll show you an example of what I mean. So the form controls put itself in the wrong place. What I really want is for it to be inside of my container, so I can just cut it and paste it into there. So we've got our form control. Let's just reduce the number of fields just to keep it really simple. So I can, of course, delete them from here. I can also delete them from here. So we've got our last name in here. Now, this is okay. It's not going to display because I'm on an edit form if I just change that to a new form. So this is okay, but it's not really what I want. It doesn't align with my styling that I've chosen. And I'm not really a fan of having an asterisk and no explanation as to what an asterisk is. So what I want to do is I want to replace all of this. And another reason why is because you can see what it's generated. It's not using any kind of good naming convention, and there are no suffixes, which is what I want for my screen. So this doesn't quite fit with what I want. So if I go back to my YAML generator and I've got my form text input, for this one I want to call it last name. So if I type in last name, it will update in my text input, and then I can copy the data card name because that's the first task that I've given myself. And I'll just unlock this so that we can modify things. So I'll paste that in there. And then my next step is to copy the update value. So there are a few things that I've given myself to do with this one. And depending on the complexity of what kind of YAML you're trying to generate, you might have something similar. So the update value is still referring to that data card 2 that I've just replaced. So I need to update this with what it really should be. And what it's doing is it's going to take the value from a control that I haven't yet pasted in there. So that's why we have the error message. And then we copy the YAML code. And the YAML code is all of the stuff we want. So we don't want any of this stuff. That can all go away. And instead we can paste in our code. And then that's what we really want. Now, some limitations of the YAML pasting is that it doesn't listen to your positioning at the moment. So it puts everything at 40 pixels down and 40 pixels across. So that will need to be fixed. And the other thing that I haven't changed for this at the moment is that the data card currently has some set widths and a set width and set height. So really I want the width to be the parent width because I want it to flex accordingly, I want it to be responsive. And for the parent height, I just know for myself that for my form controls, they're 88 pixels. So now that I've changed all of that, I've now got a form field or form input that I'm happy with. And there's a lot that's changed. There's so much that's changed, but for my effort, I hardly did anything. I copied 3 things and yeah, just changed a couple of configuration values. And then of course, another thing you'd want to change is the form, like what is your form called? Let's say form contacts. But at least I'm not changing so many different controls in order to do this. And how functional is it? Well, let's insert a button into here and let's tell the button that we want it to submit this form, which was that. And then if we go and click on the button, then it comes up and says last name is required. So it's fully functional. I've already created my error reporting, my error handling within here. So I've got whether it's an error or not, then the validation state changes. So I've done all of the hard work for this kind of thing. And all I have to do is copy and paste it in and change a few things, and then I'm sorted. And what I find is that there's an incredible speed boost when you're generating screens, form inputs, and other bits and pieces, things that can't be components, but otherwise you want as much as possible to be components. So yes, that brings me on to the second speed boost, which is basically generate what can't be a component. So use components as much as possible and generate YAML where you can't do that. And yeah, my thought process with this is essentially that layouts will have to be YAML for the time being. In web development, you can create components that manage your layout and you can slot in different components and it works beautifully. There doesn't seem to be a way of handling that side of things with Canvas apps and not an easy route for that. So for layouts, for the time being, we have to generate them. If you want to mass change things, say you want to mass replace a name of a control or something like that, there's the find and replace that we have in the studio, so we can do that. So that helps somewhat with speed boosts. Gallery controls are another thing, of course, because we can't put components in galleries, form controls, as I've just shown you. But yeah, everything else, you can have it as a component and it can be reused time and time again. And just as a quick tip to go through some simple things. So what I was talking about with the find and replace. So if you're wanting to multi-replace something, you can do that in here. Or if you want to change something inside of your controls, so say you've got some PowerFX code, I don't probably have a particularly good example here. What I'll do to show you how you can get a speed boost here as well. Let's say you have this code in your formula bar and you want to replace all of the contacts. Well, if you press Control and D, you can highlight multiple contacts or multiple of the same result, and then you can type and replace them all at once. So there are lots of different speed boosts like this kind of thing. I've got a list of all of the keyboard shortcuts that I've found on my blog. So if you go to charlessexton.com, you can find those. And I'm using them every day that I'm working with Canvas apps. So yeah, that's basically my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Charles. So now we'll get into the questions and answers part. Should you wish to ask any questions, please feel free to type in the questions box now. So our first question is I find using components quite buggy and I've had to remove them before. Is that your experience too? And how do you deal with these bugs?
That's actually not my experience recently. And I think a lot of the time, the problem lies in the fact that components are quite complex, especially if you're using enhanced component properties. There are so many different ways to do something. I think a lot of the time, if you're finding a bug, it's probably that there's a better way of reconfiguring it. So it's worth trying out, because we're in low code and we can do things quickly, try out a few different concepts and then you'll most likely hit upon one. I had a friend of mine who was asking me today about how to pass in a default date into a component, but still be able to change that date inside of the component. And at first I thought of one idea and that seemed like it wasn't so good. And my friend said, yeah, that seems a bit like a hack. So I dug around a bit more and I figured out that there is a nice way of doing it in using variables and parameters. And yeah, there's potential for it. So I think really it's a case of try different things, because it's probably not as buggy as you expect it to be if you can find the right solution for it. But of course, if you do find a bug, which is definitely possible, then report that to Microsoft so we can all benefit. Thanks.
So just the next question there is, do you think we'll ever get round trip Canvas app editing through VS Code with UI preview?
That's a cool question. That would be amazing. Do I think we'll ever get it? Maybe one day, but I think that that will probably be extremely low on Microsoft's priorities, because what they are trying to do is they're trying to put their efforts into making Canvas, well, Power Apps generally, Power Platform generally, easier for people who don't have much knowledge on it. They're not looking to do too much for the people who are professional developers who can work in code. So yeah, I don't think that's going to be coming anytime soon, but I would love to see it.
So this next question there is, will you share your YAML generator on your blog?
Yeah, I can do. I'm happy to do that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. Next person's on a question just said, fantastic presentation with a bunch of valuable information. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
So the next question is, would you recommend using modern controls inside the components?
I have been using modern controls inside the components most recently, and I haven't had any issues because of them being in components. Any issues I've had have just been because the modern controls are either in preview or just aren't fully featured. But yeah, using them in components, there's no difference as far as I can tell with using them in there as opposed to in an app.
Perfect. So just next question there is, does library components lives only in one environment? If yes, how can we deploy to other environments?
Yes, they live only in the environment that they're in at that particular moment in time. So what you would most likely be doing is you would create your library components inside a solution in your development environment, and then you would export it as managed for then other people to use. And it would then be imported into whichever environment they're working in. And then when they need an update, of course, you'd need to export and import again. So that's where you get closer towards using things like pipelines to help you with that. There is something that Microsoft have created called the catalog. I haven't looked into it yet, but I believe that you can publish your component library to the catalog and then everyone can use it. That's something for me to look into in the future. But yeah, so have a look at the catalog because that might be able to do what you need it to do.
Perfect. So just the next question there is, have you tested if Copilot is a good YAML generator for Canvas apps?
I haven't yet, no, but I'm very curious to know more about that because I can see that we could end up creating our own plan designers. Obviously not as complex as Microsoft's because we don't have the time to put into that. But I could see that, yeah, we could create a chatbot that could generate controls and things. But I haven't tested it at all yet. But of course, we've also got Copilot for PowerFX as well. So I have used Copilot to ask about different PowerFX things and different expressions in Power Automate as well. And it seems to be pretty good with that.
Just the next question there is, I can use Copilot to generate the YAML code, question mark, create different templates for different use case, question mark.
Potentially. See, that's the thing. You could definitely go into Copilot Studio and create an agent and give it the information about components and about YAML. And if you put enough effort into it, you could make it so that it's, I believe, would be a very good YAML generator. For Copilot, I'm not so sure. What was the rest of the question? Sorry, the last part.
Yeah, so create different templates for different use case, question mark.
Yeah, so it's something that needs to be tested. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, I think that's all the questions we have. So on behalf of the ESPC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Charles, for taking time out today to carry this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again for all of you joining us today, and I hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Thank you.